We run wellbeing walks, which you can be referred to by your local GP. People tell us that they go to the doctor less since they come on our wellbeing walks because of the fact that they feel more socially connected, they've built confidence.
So, how does an art trail affect the perception of your surroundings? We saw these seashells broken on the path, and I don't think we would have noticed them if it wasn't the line, if we weren't doing this sort of art hike. And there were so many that we presumed that birds brought seashells from the water and just broke them there to eat them. Hello and welcome to Exhibitionistas. Welcome to another episode of the segment Art Insider. This episode has a little bit of a background story. It turns out that during this Christmas break, my family and we went on an art hike. We visited The Line, which is a public art trail in East London. It cuts across the city from Stratford to Greenwich. It is much more than just a walk from sculpture to sculpture. You get lost in industrial spaces, crossing through very old buildings, and you also visit a completely new part of the city, specifically Stratford. There's new buildings over there. There's a whole new world that you wouldn't visit if you hadn't decided to do an art hike. So today I am welcoming the recently appointed director of this project, Sarah Carrington. And as usual, I ask her how she encountered art, but more specifically, I was really interested in knowing the specificities of this project, which is to take art beyond the museum walls to unusual spaces where people literally run into sculpture, installations, perhaps even listening to a The Line audio experience. This is art in unusual places, unexpected encounters along an art trail. Exhibitionistas is an independent podcast created and hosted by me, Joana P. Neves, because we're all both actors and spectators of art and life. Hello and welcome to Exhibitionistas, to another Art Insider episode. Today, my guest is Sarah Carrington, director of The Line. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us here at Exhibitionistas in your very, very busy schedule.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's been a long time coming. I've been meaning to reach out for a long time because I'm really curious about this project. I'm not sure many people beyond London know it, apart from the artist that maybe you commissioned a few works from. But first, I would love to know a bit more about you and about maybe your first relation with contemporary art or art in general. When did you encounter it?
So I was lucky enough to have quite a, creative family. My mum's very artistic, and my dad was quite involved in supporting different arts organisations and very musical. So it was just second nature to them that we would go and do things at the weekends. One that I always seem to refer to, but it really stands out in my mind, is a visit to the Burrell collection in Glasgow. And I think I was probably 8 or 9. And I remember this display of lace. And they talked about the makers who made the lace, and the lace was displayed so beautifully, and you could see this incredible intricacy to the work. And they talked about the women who worked on the lace, and that over time many of them would become blind, and the process of that and the labour that went into the making of this exquisite object, which was something that was then given to somebody else to wear and enjoy. And I just remember the way they presented it was so moving. I think I actually did cry. But I think it really showed me the power of object and making and artistry and the stories that are embedded within them. And I remember making my parents buy me a poster, it sounds very pompous, but of the lace. So I had it in my room and I always looked at it, and I think that was a real moment. I think also just thinking about that, the interpretation, the way that it was presented. So I think that was building that connection around curating and how that's managed, and the narrative that we are given by an institution around objects was very exciting.
But in terms of contemporary art, do you have a memory of the exhibition that kind of led you to be more in tune with what is the art that is being made today?
That I feel like is harder. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but I remember going to Saatchi's gallery in Boundary Road all those years ago, and probably when I was at sixth form, maybe, and just thinking, oh my goodness, I'm probably actually seeing Richard Wilson's oil installation, just thinking how I'm actually getting goosebumps, which is really weird, but just thinking this architecturally, the space was so different to anything I'd seen before, and it felt very urgent, and sort of the scale of the works was so extraordinary. And that moment of the 90s and that kind of feeling of suddenly contemporary art being something that people wanted to connect with and that was provoking people to think in very different ways, I think was probably quite formative. Even though I'm not, I think there's definitely works within that moment that I don't necessarily relate to as such, but I think probably that space and that moment in time was probably quite a big turning point for me.
But you're not the only person, because Ben Luke also talked about Saatchi Gallery as a very specific space. And I'm really fascinated by the 90s. And we had a chat about that because the 90s was such an important time. It was not about loving the work, but it was also the fact that me as an outsider, someone who was probably between Lisbon and Paris at the time, and learning about this later in curatorial studies, I'm fascinated by the 90s in the UK in general, because it was a moment where it touched the mainstream, didn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it was like a fusion of art and fashion and music. And I look back now and I've got teenage children, and they're obsessed with the 90s, and you sort of think I was so lucky. It was an amazing time to be in London and to be studying, and yeah, that culturally, magazines, writing, and no internet really.
You had to go to the places.
You had to be there, and you had to write everything down and read the articles, and reviews were so important. And it was, yeah, I'm not saying that what we've got now is terribly bad. I just still feel like it was to come of age in that context was pretty special, I think. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm also curious in knowing what other kind of arts or what other practice has an impact on your work with contemporary art. Is there any connectivity with other areas of creativity for you? You did start with lace.
Yeah, I mean, I think heritage objects and historic, kind of decorative arts or everyday objects in that sense, the kind of heritage and storytelling within those is probably something I'm always fascinated by. Things like folk art, and that's something that's always been interesting to me. An artist that kind of connects with those trajectories, I think, is really exciting. I think fashion is always an inspiration, and I was lucky enough to work with Roxanda on a collaboration with Rana Begum, and I think definitely growing up, like I was obsessed with magazines and fashion and the artistry, and Alexander McQueen, this kind of people that were really the sort of performative elements of fashion, and then thinking about how fashion draws on historical references all the time, and those interplays, I think, has probably been a big, in a way, probably more than I realised in some ways.
What do you mean by performative aspects of fashion?
So I guess in fashion shows, in the way that shows are catwalk, the way that particularly, I guess, someone like McQueen used music and light and drama, or John Galliano, these kind of, again, everything seems very 90s, but those are very extraordinary kind of platforms to experiment and explore different cultural references.
When you think about it, it's true that I'd never thought about the catwalk as a sort of exhibition space, as a sort of performative space, which is, now that you say it, the 90s were absolutely about that.
Going back to the lace reference as well, probably, but craft, I think, has always been something I've been, in terms of the link between art and craft, and thinking about ceramics and these kind of more everyday materials, and how those have kind of entered into contemporary art and the flow between them, and that I've always found that quite fascinating, and that they were historically often considered quite separated, and then people like William Morris and the way in which he celebrated the potential of artistry and everything that's around us, and I kind of hold on to a lot of those ideas, I think.
in your career, you've done very different things. So you've done curating, but you've done also managing. You commission artwork, but you've also organized boards and worked on funding. You worked in Australia, you worked in the US, and each time with kind of like grassroots, or at least burgeoning endeavors, let's say. So how would you define your profile, and can you also, for our listeners, because I do realize that people don't quite know what a curator does, can you tell us a little bit about how that's also incorporated in the work of a curator sometimes, at least in your case?
Gosh. I mean, in terms of defining my own profile, that's quite difficult. I think, I mean, I guess just going back to basics, I was always really fascinated with how art connects with everyday life and where art can appear in ways that people weren't necessarily expecting. So, for instance, I commissioned art in a hospital for 5 years and worked with, project managers and clinicians and people who would very rarely be talking about art and creativity as part of their everyday work
Can you tell
role.
us a little bit more about that hospital? Because it's a very specific time and a very specific area of London.
Yeah, so I was commissions manager at Vital Arts, and they are the arts charity for Barts Health, NHS Trust, which is the Royal London Hospital and Barts in the city, as well as a number of other hospitals now, Newham Hospital as well, and Whips Cross. And yeah, it was, so that kind of gave me an opportunity to work very much within East London community, but also with the East London artists. And the hospital were often quite keen that we were always working with artists that were local, and that meant we could call on all sorts of extraordinary artists that happened to live in Spitalfields or Shoreditch, and a lot of them had a direct link to the hospital. So our budgets weren't huge, but artists are often incredibly generous because they felt very passionate about the role that art can play. I think that was sort of 2007 to 2013, probably I was there. And I think now there's a much, much richer understanding about the potential of art in health. And I feel like we were doing an awful lot at that time. Now there's much more research that backs it all up. I mean, it was beginning then, but it's interesting to see now it's almost a given that hospitals should have art within the buildings. But at the time it was relative. We had to keep kind of reminding people in a hospital, for instance, it's got to function as a building that's doing all sorts of other things during that time. It's also in many ways a bit like installing art outside, because people behave in a hospital, and particularly in Whitechapel, people behaved in quite surprising ways. So we had to have everything very, very robust, and but also bringing joy and bringing surprise and giving artists an opportunity to do something extraordinary for them. So having to balance all of those different things. And actually for me, I'm always like, what do you want to do as an artist? I want to start from there and push it as far as we can. But I've also got to be very mindful of clinical demands for that space, what patients need to feel like in there, and what we can do to support that. How the space needs to be cleaned, security, like really boring practical things, power, how you access power, if they want to work with neon, what are the light levels, all. So, and I find that, it's incredibly challenging, but it's also so fascinating. And every single commission is completely different.
I'm really interested in knowing a bit more about the difference between curating or commissioning an artwork for a space where people are not expecting an artwork, which is what defines, I guess, contemporary art outside of the gallery and the museum. Are the parameters different? And also, do you have a sense of the reaction of the public as well, of the people who are patients/spectators suddenly?
We did things with sound. We worked with nature recordist Chris Watson and installed his nature recordings alongside Bob and Roberta Smith's paintings of national animals to celebrate, global heritage, which is again another characteristic of East London. People from all over the world live there. And and then you kind of would get feedback from parents saying, oh my gosh, my daughter saw that on the way to surgery and it lifted her spirits, or it made her think about her relatives elsewhere, or just like little anecdotes like that. And that's the kind of thing it's quite hard to sort of track in data, but it's very powerful to know that, and for the artist to know that work has had because a lot of the time artists don't have that feeling that their work has a kind of specific connection in a particular moment for somebody's life, and that's what art in hospitals can do. And people like Hospital Rooms are doing that in an extraordinary way now, as well as Vital Arts are still doing amazing things as well. So
So that leads us to the line, because the line is a very, very special project. You've just been nominated director a few months ago, I believe. Megan Piper was one of the initiators of the project. And the line is basically, well, you could call it public art, but it's a bit more than that, because there's a real sense of wanting to be intentional about it, and also to create a path in a very specific area of London. So can you tell us a little bit very quickly about the history and why it came about, but more specifically what it is and how you can experience it?
So the line is a public art trail which runs from Greenwich in the south up to Stratford, and it's almost 8 kilometres long, and it follows the waterways of East London, and it broadly follows the line of the Greenwich Meridian as well. And it was set up in 2015 by Megan Piper and Clive Dutton. And Clive was head of inward investment and head of regeneration at Newham, and was part of the Olympic Games in Stratford. And Megan was a gallerist and art dealer, and had also worked at Momart. So she was very aware of the artworks that were in storage, not being seen by the public. And together they were from very different backgrounds, but they had this incredible creative chemistry, and they came up with the idea to bring artworks along the route of the line and to draw audiences, to really connect people to place. And initially it was a loans program, so there was a call out. They worked with a kind of a selection panel initially, and there was a call out to gallerists and artists to suggest works. And there was the first series of works with 10 artworks on loan in 2015, and there was a huge fundraising campaign that went on behind the scenes to get the project up and running. And so it included works by like Damien Hirst, Martin Creed, Edward Paolozzi. There was also dialogue with the GLA, so a series of commissioned works that were at the Greenwich Peninsula that had been installed for the millennium were also brought onto the line. So it kind of became almost like a joining the dots of work of public art. So I joined in 2019, and we built a new fundraising and sort of engagement strategy around, because I could just see how much extraordinary potential there was that hadn't quite been tapped because of, Clive actually sadly passed away 2 weeks after the line opened. And so Megan was left to kind of figure out how on earth to keep moving forward. So in many ways it was sort of fundraising to stay still for a number of years, understandably. And I think I was able to bring my knowledge of kind of health and well-being and the benefits of art for health and well-being, as well as experience of working at Future City, working with developers and thinking about how much I knew people wanted art within new developments, and could see how much East London was growing along that stretch. And the line is like this perfect opportunity to kind of bring all of those things together, and also really think about how local people could use the line more. And then COVID happened, and we found that people were just connecting with the line in a completely new way, because we were the only museum open in London, and people were finding they wanted to be by the water, and then they discovered these artworks, and they wanted to use it for running or for their daily exercise. And so it took on this whole new significance for people, which we could never have planned for. And actually it became an extraordinarily busy moment for us, because we launched a new app with Bloomberg Connects. We were like I think we're in the first 7 organizations on Bloomberg Connects. We launched a new website.
How does it work? So Bloomberg Connects, so through Bloomberg Connects, it provides audio aids to experience. How does it work?
So, I guess for us, it was perfect because we couldn't have an audio guide. There's no way we could give people devices to carry along the line. So it just meant on your phone, you have an app and you can connect with artists' audio. We developed a meditation so people could do guided meditation along the route. We've got an audio guide from Bill Nighy talking about the architecture and the heritage. So it kind of was this new layer of a way to experience the line whilst you're walking, but also for people around the world, if they want to learn about the line, it's all there as a kind of audio experience. So that was a really big moment for us. And then we also started commissioning in 2019, which is something that I bought from previous roles, because it had remained loaned primarily. And we commissioned Larry Achimpong, again, all through COVID. He developed this extraordinary audio commission in collaboration with the Museum of London, which you listen to as you cross the cable car on the line.
I've created a new audio work titled Sanko Time for the line, which really considers the history and the relationship between the Royal Dock and Greenwich in London, and the connecting Meridian line and its relationship with Accra, the capital of Ghana in West Africa.
Between the water and the earth, skin and bones, death and rebirth. These unearthed histories are the lines that connect us.
Sanko time is combining two words, of course, time, and then the word Sankofa, which is an Akan phrase meaning to go back and get it, particularly thinking about going back and retrieving something that is lost at a certain point in time that could be in relation to one's own identity or knowledge, especially. And so you revisit certain points that have happened within memory in order to think about what's happening within the present.
These royal docks were previously celebrated global centre for innovation and industry. But for many, they still represent the sting of colonialism.
The connecting thread amongst all of this is water itself. And so spending a lot of time recording water and even thinking about the relationship of traveling across water has been quite a big deal. That connecting point in the line also reveals itself to histories that perhaps are not really spoken as much about.
I mean, what a lot of people must understand in the British colonies in particular, they weren't concerned about blacks being educated.
We commissioned Rana Begum to create a new sculpture, which again we had to do during COVID, and then it was installed we did a performance with English National Ballet and a collaboration with Roxanda, which it felt like it was just after one of the last lockdowns, and it was this amazing sunny day, and it just really felt like this kind of new beginning and point of connection, and that was very special and actually really exciting to see the connection between performance and sculpture. That was the first time we'd done that on the line.
Events now that we're post-COVID,
Yes.
is this something that you also brought into this post-COVID time, which is to devise activities around the sculptures? Because how many sculptures are there throughout these 8 kilometers?
Yes, we have about 24 different works at the moment along the route. And there's a kind of plan to get to 30 by 2030. We've initiated other performative moments. It's a really brilliant way to bring people together to create a kind of connection collectively. So obviously you can walk the line at any time. It's open all day, every day, all through the year. But something about performance actually creates that momentum. And so we did disco sailing in 2024 with Rashid Areen, which was a water-based performance where you essentially kind of wear a top that makes you become a human sail, and then you float on a disc. So it's not disco, it's actually the disc you're sailing on the disc. And Rashid turned 90 last year 2025, and it was the first time he'd ever seen the work performed. So that was a very special moment. And again, people experiencing their body in space kind of becoming sculptural as a moment is very, very exciting, and something we'd love to do again on the line, because obviously it's also that more immediate, commissioning sculptures takes a really, really long time, and that performance, I'm not saying performance is straightforward. Disco sailing was not straightforward at all.
I can imagine the production behind, because that's also your profile, is also being able to understand the way things are made, what is needed for the production of an artwork or a piece or an activator or a performative act, and then kind of making it happen. So tell me a little bit about the process. How long does it take, for example, to organize that particular performance that you just mentioned?
Roughly 2 years. And within that time we had to fundraise, we had to secure permissions, we explored quite a few different places on the line. So each time you're exploring a location, you have to do incredible amounts of research and get people on board. And then sometimes it doesn't work in that site, so you have to rethink. So you have to kind of allow your mind to not be too fixed on the outcome. Otherwise, you'd be incredibly frustrated. And then, we had planned to do 2 performances of disco sailing, and the second one had to be cancelled very last minute because there was very heavy rain and there was a sewage release into the river in the Olympic Park, and it was deemed unsafe. And so that, those sorts of things that might come up when you're working in the public realm, you are at the mercy of partners, landowners, weather. There's so many different factors, birds, there's just like so many different things that can happen. Obviously, it was really sad to cancel, but actually, weirdly, we got loads of publicity because people were it sort of highlighted the issue with water management in this country. And so that was we could never have anticipated that with the best planning in the world. So, but yeah, I think I just see it as each project, there's just so much to learn, and you have to find out who you need to get, who you need in the mix, whose expertise you need, and bringing people on that journey with you. And you have to provide a lot of reassurance to different partners, because every time you do something, it's completely new. You could never say to somebody, oh, when we did this sculpture before with this material, or when we previously had people floating on the river wearing these things, this is what happened. We don't, so you have to test everything and build confidence, but you also have to allow people you have to bring people on that journey to have a kind of leap of faith, which they then have this extraordinary experience. That's what I love, is that people, like in the hospital, people would be like, I never thought we'd be able to do this, and we've made this thing happen, and people now have a completely different environment. And that's, I'm not saying it's kind of life-changing, but I think it's transformative.
Tell me a little bit about funding, because you've all throughout your career, you've worked on funding. And I think this is sort of the nasty word of contemporary art, in the sense that it is difficult, it is necessary, it is very different from context to context. If you're the Tate, obviously you have so many arguments for funding. But then if you are doing something completely different, public, so there for everyone, where it's much harder to, as you were explaining before, to get feedback from the impacts in regards to the impact of what you do, because people are just passing. And they may post something on Instagram, but they may not tag you. So it is a difficult thing to evaluate. So could you very quickly tell me about your different experiences with funding? You can vent a little bit, you're allowed to, because I think it's the most frustrating thing, funding, but also the most rewarding thing when it actually goes well.
Yeah, I kind of work on the principle that kind of money and support follows good ideas. And, I guess a bit like bringing people on the journey, I think a lot of people are wanting to be inspired and feel connected. And yes, it's about impact, but it's also about goodwill and people being excited about the potential of something. And so I guess in terms of my funding journey, I think I mentioned before we recorded, I applied for an Arts Council grant when I was at university, and I remember thinking we set up a little magazine at Brighton University, and I was so blown away that we were given money, and I think it was through lottery funding, Arts Council, Arts for All, it was called, or something. And I remember that feeling, thinking, oh my gosh, they believe in this, and we've got money to do this. Somebody actually wants to give us money. And it was just such a revelation and really exciting. And I think I've always had that zeal of like, let's find a way, let's find a way to make this possible. And then I worked with Louise McKinney at the Serpentine when I just finished at the Royal College, and learned a huge amount from her in terms of all the different ways you can source funding, from corporate involvement, from cultural embassies, from trusts and foundations, and Arts Council. And then when I worked as a freelance curator, we did loads of fundraising, and we ran a curatorial partnership for 6 years, completely funded through European money, Arts Council funding, British Council, different pots that we did that entirely off our own, and actually managed to give ourselves a salary. And that was a kind of amazing, again, a bit like, wow, we found a way, and a lot of it is about, telling a really good, not telling a story sounds like you're not telling the truth, but showing people where you need to get to and how they can help you get there. And you're absolutely right with the line, it is really hard to track feedback because we don't have any tickets, we don't have any entrance or exit. But the principle of us being available and accessible within a context that's incredibly, has kind of historic structural inequality that's really significant, has major health factors. There's lots within that context which is really, really challenging, and particularly around COVID, it was one of the hardest hit neighbourhoods in the UK. And so we want to be able to show how the line is trying to, what we know about our community and our context, and how the line is trying to do all it can to support people in different ways. And then we show the impact. So it's more, I guess our engagement program has been able to collect a lot of information and feedback and knowledge, and we listen to people and we convey that to funders to say, look, we know that they enjoyed it, we know that it meant this to them. And we run wellbeing walks, which you can be referred to by your local GP, and people tell us that they go to the doctor less since they come on our wellbeing walks because of the fact that they feel more socially connected, they've built confidence, they've found connection to nature they didn't have previously. And so those are quite compelling examples, even though we're not saying we can tell you what everybody who walked the line this weekend felt about it, but we can give you quite solid examples of the way in which our programming has impacted on people. And similarly, we run a youth guides program, so we employ young people every summer, and that was really set up as a program about skills and employability. And each summer we do surveys to check how they've done and what they've gained. And they'll tell us about, yes, they've learned more about contemporary art, they've learned more about public speaking and about their neighborhood, but they've also been telling us, outside of these normal skills questions we use, that they've actually, their mental health has improved because they've been outside, because they've been off their screens, they've been in nature with other young people that they wouldn't have met otherwise. And that was never the aim of the program, but it's quite interesting that those things can start to be fed back to you. And we do have a lot of people who walk the line and then they feel they really want to see it grow and see it thrive.
I was wondering if you have any anecdotes, little episodes that you might know in relation to the physical experience of the sculptures in the whole circuit.
In terms of people's experiences of them, or yes, and actually I should do a plug for our book, which just recently launched in November, published with Fiden Monticelli. There's a brilliant essay in the book by Andrew Jones, and he explores all the ways in which the line connects with people through our projects and programming. He interviewed a number of people that we've worked with, so one of our youth guides, one of our wellbeing walk attendees, different partner organisations we work with, and that's a really beautiful reflection on the different encounters and relationships people have through the line. And one of them is Amar, who lives very near the line and has this amazing little dog that he walks every day on the line. And obviously it's useful for his dog walk, but he very much talks about how the line has it's kind of part of his Buddhist practice. And he had a really terrible car accident a few years ago, and he uses the line as part of his kind of mental and physical recovery. And that he loves the fact that these works kind of provoke his thoughts and slow him down to reflect and think about the world and himself in a different way. And that's something we do hear quite a lot in terms of that idea of kind of connecting with your surroundings and connecting with yourself. And that's what the line allows you to do. And it's sort of on your own terms, which is probably different to what happens inside a gallery or a museum. Maybe it's that feeling of being outside in the elements, and it's a kind of journey of your own making.
I will put a link in the show's notes for people to go straight to the book and purchase it. I was also wondering about something else, which is based on this idea of the line being the possibility of experiencing art in a different way, and to incorporate art in the fabric of the city and day-to-day life. I was wondering what kind of exhibition or art experience, it can be outside of museum spaces, you'd like to see in the future or experience in the future.
It's difficult without saying anything too specific that I've got kind of my dream project, which is actually a real thing that I'm really hoping will happen, which is part of this thing of actually having to dream things in. You have to dream things into being, you know. So if I'll say it, but I won't give too many details because we can't really talk about it yet. But I would love the idea that we could, this is specific to the line, develop an artwork which somehow reflects the specifics of the kind of landscape and the wildlife along the route, which is so unique and extraordinary. Within one of the most densely populated parts of the UK, you can find 52 species of birds, you can find seals, wildflowers. It's the sort of nature thriving against the odds. And I would love to kind of have an artist really capture some of that through, I don't know how exactly, or I've got an idea, but I'm not going to say it yet. And then to think about how we could engage different partners, like East Bank at the top of the line in Stratford. There's now Sadler's Wells East, the BBC choirs will be based there, and recording facilities, London College of Fashion, obviously V&A East. And what they have are these extraordinary collections and resources, but they also have these enormous buildings. And what we have is the ground level, the public realm, the kind of layers of experience you have from encountering the public realm and our community connections that we have. So I'd love to do something that would capture that wildlife, something that's a physical outcome, but maybe also some sort of extraordinary performance. We once did a procession on the line with Serge Tukwe Clotti with school children from Newham, which was just the most extraordinary moment of them kind of claiming the space and dancing and processing along with Serge, and boats on the Thames were tooting at the children to say hello. And it was this amazing transformation. And I think the power of a procession is very exciting. So I'd love to do some sort of another procession on the line of some kind. So that's very much about like what I'd like to see on the line rather than in general terms. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
It's funny because now that you're saying that, the last time I went, we saw these seashells broken on the path.
Yeah.
And I don't think we would have noticed them if it wasn't the line. So if we weren't doing this sort of art hike.
Yeah.
And there were so many that we presumed that birds brought seashells from the water and just broke them there to eat them.
Yeah.
And it was so exciting.
And you see them all the way, and I can't remember the name of the bird now, but they dropped them to break them open. And there are kingfishers, there's herons, and cormorants that dry their wings on Helen Cammack's Bridge. So yeah, I think it's so surprising, and it's such an industrial area. That to somehow have all of that sing out through a piece feels very exciting. And also, I guess, considering how, the climate emergency and the changes that are happening and how we have to live in cities and how we relate to nature, I think that's becoming, that's something we really want to ensure is part of key part of our program.
What is the balance between economy and the dream? So the project, how is it measurable? Is it balanced at the moment? Is it always a problem? Because I think that at the moment we're kind of undergoing this revision of materials. For example, you just mentioned the climate emergency and toxic materials, etc. And we're also trying to leave less of a presence as humans, perhaps, or impose ourselves less. So, of course, I'm thinking about that, but I'm also thinking about the economic crisis. Everything's very expensive at the moment. Exports have kind of broken the chain of availability in this country of materials and food and lots of things. So I think that question for me was always important, but it has become more urgent in some ways. How does the line provide a vision on this or some answers on this question?
It's a very good question. I think obviously within projects there's always a balance between an artist's ambition and aspiration and then what's actually affordable and practical. And public art commissioning is not very cheap because you need to create something that's really strong and robust and often has to have quite complicated foundations and has to be approved by structural engineers. And so often if we're working with artists and it's their first time working in the public realm, that's a bit of a journey for them to go on. We definitely assess materials from a sustainability perspective and try and ensure that anything we're using is not negative for the environment or has a kind of negative, or also think about how things, the afterlife of works as well, if they're not on the line. I mean, a key principle for us is that we just really want to make sure people are paid to reflect the efforts and the time that they're putting into things as much as we can. We are also really lucky that we have quite a lot of pro bono support, which really helps. So things like our engineering is often provided by an extraordinary engineer at Arup, who has a kind of wealth of knowledge and an incredible creative ability to work with artists and help them navigate working outside. So for instance, Rana Begum worked with him on her commission, which he created a whole support structure for, and it wouldn't really have existed in the form because she wanted any support to be kind of effectively invisible. And so Steve McKinsey came up with this system with her, which allowed her to do that work outside, that she'd never presented that work outside before. So And that would have been phenomenally expensive for us. So I think, and that, again, I feel like it's part of that thing of trying to make something extraordinary and magical and take everyone on a journey. Often people are just like, once they know there's an idea and a problem to solve, if you get the right minds in the room, they will go above and beyond to make that possible.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it's really important to really highlight the fact that sponsoring, beyond patronage, there's also sponsoring, because a lot of people say, oh, I don't have enough money to support, I'd love to support artistic projects, but actually you can also bring your own expertise and give a few hours during the week or during the month to a project and support an artist. And that's also a way of being a patron. And that makes your work even more admirable, because you have to, find all these people to support you. But thank you so much. This has been lovely. Thank you for your time. And I hope you come back to Exhibitionistas.
I hope so too. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Exhibitionistas is an independent podcast created and hosted by me, Joana P. Neves, because we're all both actors and spectators of art and life.